Taylor McHargue is a weekly guest with us. Former Rice quarterback, does games on television, college football as well, joins us SicEm365 Radio, 365 Sports, Paul Catalina, and I'm David Smoak. Taylor, I've always asked this question. I've asked a lot of people this over the years. How much would you have enjoyed, and have you ever thought about this, why don't colleges have scrimmages in August? I'm not talking about against each other. I'm talking against somebody else that plays college football.
Yeah, I hear you completely. I always thought it would have been great to have that in the spring game. Like, replace your spring game instead of it being really an inter-squad game with let us go play another FBS school and have that be the spring game. I don't know about it in August because you're trying to keep everybody healthy. But the idea behind it, I think if you could have specifically for the spring game, go out and sell tickets to that and allow your guys to hit somebody other than just the other side of your own team. I would have enjoyed that as a player. But again, a lot of it goes back to just trying to keep guys healthy. I think it's the biggest reason why they don't do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I always thought that maybe like do it with an FCS team, so, Stephen F. Austin could come in and play Baylor. But then again, those FCS teams, I don't know if they want that in the spring, like you said, trying to keep healthy. They don't have the numbers that somebody else does.
Yeah, some of it's health. Some of it's also, your spring roster numbers. They look different for different schools. And in this day and age of you're trying to bring in kids from the transfer portal, what are your numbers going to look like? And sometimes, you might commit to a game like that, and then you get into spring ball, and through the transfer portal, you might be light at a certain position where you say, guys, we can't play a game right now. We're waiting on depth to come in at that spot. I think that's another issue with it. But just from like a competition standpoint as a player, I would have much preferred to have somebody else that you're playing against for a scrimmage or a spring game.
I know this may be a simple question or maybe a dumb question, but if you don't know the answer, it's not dumb. How quickly do you start jumping in on your opening opponent, whether Baylor, of course, is playing Albany because of the schedule change? La Tech is no longer on the schedule, so they had to replace him with somebody. And then it's Brigham Young, who they played last year. When does that start to creep into early, I guess, fall workouts?
Well, it's different for the players versus the coaches. The coaches are going to start game planning pretty early on. They're going to have their own separate meetings, and they're going to be thinking about their non-conference opponents before they're really introducing some of this to the players. Your cadence with install in camp for the first couple of weeks is just about what you do. It's getting your own stuff down, and offensive and defensive side of the ball. It's making sure you've got your bread and butter down and knowing what your fundamentals are. And then you start to slowly introduce concepts for the teams that you're going to be playing. And your opener, you'll start to introduce some of what they work on a couple weeks out. And then obviously once you get to game week, you get into the normal preparation. But in college football specifically, they're going to try and make sure that we do what we do well. And you're going to introduce that right at day one at camp. And they do the same thing in spring ball and try and hammer home all of the basics and the fundamentals, and then they'll start to slowly introduce your non-conference opponents and your out-of-conference games. They'll introduce that in the last couple of weeks of training camp.
Taylor, you saw the coaches poll that came out. What are your thoughts on that? Did you think there are some people too high, too low? Anything jump out at you?
Yeah, I would have had Georgia ahead of Ohio State. I think Georgia has. I know they've got to replace a ton of production on the defensive side of the ball, but there's still so much talent on that team. And I know the preseason poll is not supposed to factor in schedule, but Georgia's path back to the college football playoff is among the easiest in the SEC on the east side of the division, obviously. I like where A&M is. You could possibly put them up. I would have not had a problem with them up ahead of Notre Dame with just the amount of talent that they have on the schedule. And then where the Big 12 teams stack up right now, where, Oklahoma, Baylor, and Oklahoma State would have been fine with Baylor up ahead of Oklahoma. I do think top down, there's probably more talent on the roster at Oklahoma right now, but there's a lot of turnover there as well. New head coach, new defensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. So it would have been fine with Baylor up ahead of them. And then like everybody else, I thought it was hilarious that Texas get the number one vote from somebody out there. We still don't know exactly who it was, but I think if it was designed to create humor, it accomplished its goal.
Would you have had them in the top 25?
I would have had Texas in the top 25. I would have had them a little bit lower. I would have had them closer to where Ole Miss and Arkansas are ranked right now. We talked about this last week. Texas is the most interesting team in college football to me this year because they could be 6-6 this year, and we look and say, look, Sark may be on the hot seat, or they could legitimately lose to Alabama and then go win the Big 12. I think they've got that level of talent, but the disparity between what their floor is versus what their ceiling is probably the greatest in all of the Big 12. And they're so interesting. And how many years have we done this in a row, right, where Texas gets put in the top 25 in the preseason, and then you look up at the end of the year and they're trying to eke out a bowl game. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, I think that game against Alabama will be a good measuring stick to figure out where exactly they stand.
Yeah, they are, and they have incredible weapons, and the deal is that you just don't know. There's always been something missing, whatever people have talked about, culture, whatever it's entitlement, or maybe it's just they've been overrated, and that appears to be the case as well. How do you know if you have a great locker room?
Well, I always thought our 2013 team, the one that won 10 games, won Conference USA, it was a self-policed locker room, and I think that is a lot of times the ones. Those are your teams that when the coaches aren't having to step in and hold people accountable, those are usually your best teams. Honestly, saw a lot of that in Baylor last year. That felt like a team that in practice things aren't going well. You're going to have your seniors and your captains and your leaders. They're going to be the ones to call people out and try and right the ship on a practice and get momentum going back in the right direction. You know you're having trouble in training camp. You know you may be set up for a poor season when people really aren't upset with a poor practice, or they're just kind of counting the reps and buying the time and waiting to get through a practice and move on to the next day. That's when you look up and say, hey, look, we're not competing. And as long as you're competing day in and day out, no matter what it is, that's when you feel like you've got a good squad.
How hard is it to build that in this world of college football? I mean, just anywhere, with the fact that from the time you're recruited to the time you get on campus, before you've even taken a snap, people are already, writing your legacy about how many national championships you're going to help their team win.
Well, I think in the day and age of the transfer portal, it is difficult because a lot of kids now, the school that they land at, it's really look, this might just be a temporary fit for me. And culture takes time to build a lot of, and Joe Burrow at LSU is one of the rare cases where he stepped in, wasn't there for a real long time, but it felt really seamless where he got on campus and it was clear he was the leader and was a shot in the arm for them from a culture standpoint. But a lot of times it takes 2 or 3 years to have guys play in the same systems, get to know one another, be good teammates. And you need that. And that is really difficult when you're constantly reaching to the transfer portal and bringing guys in to patch a team together, go play for one season, and then you're going to do it all over again.
Taylor McHargue, again, former Rice quarterback with us, SicEm365 Radio and 365 Sports. So you have games you have to start to look at and study and prep for. Is there one in particular you're already working on?
There are, yeah. I've got Texas Tech week 1 in their opener against Murray State, and then I go to Cincinnati the next week. So really both of those teams going back and looking at their spring games, trying to, figure out whatever you can learn from, Zach Kittle moving over or Kitley moving over from Western Kentucky, where he's going to be the offensive coordinator at Texas Tech. Going back and looking at, I had Western Kentucky in a game last year against Rice, going back and watching their offense. And then, looking at Cincinnati, what is their quarterback room going to look like this year? How much production are they losing on the defense? Obviously, Texas Tech, it's their opener, new head coach. That's going to get most of the headlines. But then you also want to be prepared for the other side as well. What's Murray State bringing back? Want to be knowledgeable on them as well.
Did you ever play at Tech when you were at Rice?
We did. I redshirted, but I went to the game. It was Mike Leach's last year in 2009, and I will never forget Coach Bailiff. We're in the locker room. We're getting the pregame speech. And he says, all right, we do our pregame prayer or whatever. He says, all right, helmets on, don't look up. And we go into the tunnel. And as soon as we turn into the tunnel, what do? I look straight up. And there's a clearing, and I don't know if it's still there, but there's a clearing from the cement wall to the tarp where fans could hang out between it and lean over the wall. And they're just raining stuff down on us. And most of the time you kind of take your time down the tunnel, not there at Jones AT&T Stadium. We sprinted down the tunnel, went out on the field, and we were not going to be the toughest competition that Tech faced that year, but those fans, they brought the intensity no matter who it was.
Look, I'm telling you, the baller move is to catch one of those tortillas
and throw it right back.
And no, just bite it.
Oh, yeah,
just
bite
eat
into it.
Just,
yeah, well, you don't know where some of them have been. You said throwing stuff at us. Besides tortillas, what other stuff did you see at that time?
Yeah, there was a sausage wrap. I remember that. There were no glass bottles, thank God, but there were some Coke bottles involved. So we got the traditional welcome from the fans in Lubbock.
Well, that's awesome. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for your time. Taylor McHargue again
Absolutely.
with us, former Rice quarterback, TV analyst, and also with us on Fridays at 4:30 throughout the football season. Texas Tech, that schedule.